Down through the years, in the rich history that is America, there have been names of very famous political families: Adams, Taft, Cabot Lodge, Roosevelt. In more recent history, there's been Bush, Clinton. Now, for those of you who are out there watching, I can just see you right now. You're probably jumping up and down saying, "But Front Porch, there's one name that you've forgotten." Oh, no, no, no. I haven't forgotten it. And neither have most people in Washington, D.C. or around the country. As a matter of fact, that name right now is sending an absolute panic through the ranks of the Democrat establishment in Washington, D.C., even going so far as to send a panic through some people working in the White House. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. 3 days ago, a gentleman with a very famous political name dropped a piece of news in the Northeast that has set tongues ablaze inside Washington, D.C. And without further ado, I give you the man of the hour. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced in a visit at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire that he is strongly considering a run for the Democratic nomination to seek the presidency of the United States. In other words, an open challenge to current President Joe Biden. Now, for those of you out there who are a little younger and maybe you're not that familiar with RFK Jr., he is a lawyer. He is the head of an organization known as Children's Health Defense, very much involved in the anti-vaccine movement, particularly in the area of the COVID-19 vaccine, offering up legal challenges around the country to mandates and to other issues, particularly when it comes to children. He is a lawyer, and he comes from a very long line of Kennedys. His father was the legendary Robert F. Kennedy Sr., Attorney General of the United States Senator from New York, and, unfortunately, a man who was assassinated in 1968. His uncle, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States, assassinated in 1963. His uncle, Ted Kennedy, himself would have sought the presidency of the United States and actually did in 1980, doing something that his nephew is now thinking about. If you'll remember, Ted Kennedy, even with the scandal of Chappaquiddick hanging over him, gave a challenge to then President Jimmy Carter and gave one of the most legendary concession speeches in the history of the Democratic National Convention when he finished it off with the rousing words, "The work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die." Hey, I'm not a liberal, but even I was impressed with that speech. So, as you can see, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. comes from a long, lustrous history of a political family. And the fact that he's actually thinking about taking on Joe Biden is absolutely terrifying Democrats. He's got the name, he's got the charisma, he's got the resume, he's got the issues. Could he challenge Joe Biden? Yes, he could. What would his odds be? No idea. But I think it's worth a discussion, because if the Biden White House dismisses this challenge and doesn't give it the serious consideration that it would merit, they may do so at their own peril. So Robert Kennedy Jr. has announced that he's thinking about running for president. But that begs a whole bunch of questions. What would a Kennedy campaign look like at this stage? What kind of issues would he run on? What are the pros? What are the cons? And by pros and cons, I mean, all right, what would be his advantages going into the election? What would be his disadvantages? And I guess the big question is, could he really defeat Joe Biden in a Democratic primary in 2024? Well, as far as what kind of campaign he would run, when he was talking with reporters up in New Hampshire, Kennedy said that he would run as a progressive Democrat. Now, a lot of people out there, particularly younger voters who hear that expression, start thinking to themselves, yeah, he's going to run as my kind of Democrat. Back up a second. That all depends on how you define the word progressive, and that all depends on how you define running a Democrat. You see, when it comes to Junior, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. If you know anything about history, his dad was virulently against the Vietnam War. He was virulently anti-deep state. As a matter of fact, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., if you ask him, will tell you that it was the deep state that took out his dad and took out his uncle. His opinion, and in America, he's got the right to hold it. But what kind of issues would he run on? Well, definitely anti-corporatism. I think definitely he'd be against foreign intervention in other countries. I think he'd be definitely for taking on major corporations here in the U.S., definitely against the vaccine mandates. What would the pros be of a campaign? Well, like I say, Kennedy's advantages would be, number one, his name. That name in the Democratic Party still has reverence, even though the same coalition may or may not exist in small or large part today. Drop that name among Democrats, and there's an instant ooh factor. He's still got the ooh factor. So there's that. Downside? Well, some people would say money and organization. Okay, I concede that. The money might be a problem. Organization? I don't know that that would be such an issue because honestly, there is a palpable hunger inside the Democratic Party, particularly among younger voters. They're looking for something. And it just might be that RFK Jr. can rekindle the same kind of magic that his dad had in 1968 when he ran for president. Now, could he win? Well, it sort of depends upon who you ask. I was listening to a live stream today between Richard Barris and Robert Barnes. Barris is a pollster, Barnes is a lawyer, and I won't lie about it. Their discussion sort of inspired me to record this video because I think this is worth a discussion. I really do. Barnes is of the opinion that that old Democrat coalition, that the Kennedy coalition, is still out there and it could be put back together. As a matter of fact, perhaps even in larger part than what it was when his dad ran in '68. Other people think it's a long shot. Me? I'm kind of inclined to believe it is a long shot. But then again, the Kennedys have never been known to shy away from a challenge. As a matter of fact, you got to remember, JFK won the presidency in 1960 against a sitting vice president, Richard Nixon. In '68, everybody knew that Robert Kennedy Sr. was going to challenge LBJ, and if it had been for LBJ dropping out of the race, that would have been a really head-on primary. Like I said earlier, his Uncle Ted took on Jimmy Carter in 1980, so it's not like the Kennedys are afraid of a fight. Matter of fact, they almost act like they relish in it. But like I say, odds are long, don't know what might happen. But I mentioned a moment ago, there is a hunger among younger voters in the Democratic Party, and that gets to the issue of the satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the current occupant of the White House, which we will now discuss. Now, I mentioned that there is a palpable hunger inside the Democratic Party, and most of that has to do with the current occupant of the White House, President Joe Biden, who we here on the front porch affectionately refer to as President Soft Serve, a nickname given to him not so much for how he likes to eat his ice cream, as so much it is the current condition of his brains. How unpopular is Joe Biden, or how dissatisfied are people with him? Take a look at this. This is a poll that came out just about a month ago, done by the AP. Headline in the story, Biden 2024, most Democrats say no, thank you. Go a little bit further down this article. A majority of Democrats now think one term is plenty for President Joe Biden, despite his insistence that he plans to seek re-election in 2024. That's according to a new poll from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research that shows just 37% of Democrats say they want him to seek a second term, down from 52% in the weeks before last year's midterm elections. Holy cow, you've got well over a third of Democrats who do not want to see the current occupant of the White House seek re-election. Now, those of you may be out there saying, okay, but, it's just a temporary thing, right? I mean, Joe's going to get through this. I don't know how temporary this really is. Take a look at the following. You got to remember, Joe Biden historically has never been popular in the Democratic Party. Look at the following and I'll prove it to you. You got to remember, Joe Biden ran for president back in 1988, and to tell you just how well he did, he didn't even make it to the primaries at the time, mostly because of the fact that he got caught plagiarizing from other people's speeches, and he was considered obnoxious, telling people just how smart he was. But the scandal with the plagiarism is what did him in. He withdrew before the primaries ever started. Fast forward to 2008. gets to the Iowa caucuses. Now remember, this man's been around Washington, D.C. since 1972. Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, all kinds of highfalutin titles in the Democratic Party. And what did he get for it? A whopping 1% in the Iowa caucuses in 2008. And if memory serves me right, he withdrew before the New Hampshire primary even took place. And that gets us to 2020. But wait, Front Porch, he won in 2020. Yeah, but you got to remember the circumstances of how he got there. Take a look at this. I'll refresh your memory. Joe Biden, former Vice President of the United States at this point, gets a whopping 14% at the Iowa caucuses. He finished fourth. He then went up to New Hampshire, and if you thought that Iowa was bad for him, New Hampshire was even worse. He only got 8% of sitting vice president. Oh, excuse me, he was already out of office at that point. A former vice president of the United States got 8% of the vote inside the Democratic Party. Nevada, he fared no better. And then it got down to South Carolina, where a combination of things happened that started him on his way. Number one, he got the endorsement of the legendary Jim Clyburn, an African-American congressman, and it absolutely brought the black vote home for Joe. Number two, Bernie had made some rather interesting remarks about communism and the joys of living under it in other countries. Hey, look, things are kind of crazy inside the Democratic Party, but even they got a belly full of that and said, no, thank you, don't want anything to do with it. And then that led to his victory in South Carolina, a victory that caused Barack Obama to step in behind the scenes and clear the field for Joe Biden. He went on to victory, and victory, and victory, and finally secured the nomination, and won in a legendary and contentious and contested presidential election. So, in the end, where does all that leave us? Well, let's look at the possibilities. RFK Jr. gets in. Biden decides to bow out. Advantage? Well, who can say? But I'd say it goes to Trump at that point. I mean, because there's no guarantee that even if Biden gets out and Kennedy gets in, he still gets the nomination. Because at that point, you might have people like Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer or J.D. Pritzker of Illinois jump into this thing. Option 2 says Biden gets in, Kennedy gets in, Biden still wins, but Kennedy causes him to bleed. Again, advantage. Trump. Because at that point, it sets up an almost like 1980 scenario where Ted Kennedy weakened Carter enough that Reagan came along that between a combination of issues and Reagan's charisma, he absolutely cleaned Carter's clock. Option 3, Biden gets in, Kennedy gets in, Kennedy beats Biden. Advantage? At that point, it's 50-50. Who knows what's going to happen? But it's sure going to be fun to watch. As I start to wrap this up, I would like to ask the following favors of you. Number 1, if you are not a subscriber to this channel, please do so. We are a going little concern. We'd like to be a going big concern, but we can't do that unless we've got your help. Number 2, if you enjoyed this video and you have friends of yours that you think would enjoy it as well, please feel free to share this around. We are a one-man band, and I'm the band, so I'll take all the help I can get. And number 3, please hit the like button. You would be amazed what giving a thumbs up to a video like this will do for a relatively new content creator. My name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you next time.